In May 1945, the war concluded, causing the Luftwaffe's overnight collapse. Across Europe, thousands of German aircraft sat derelict. This inventory ranged from classic fighters to state-of-the-art jets and incomplete prototypes, granting the Allies sudden control of technology years ahead of its time, and a clandestine race commenced to seize, analyze, or eliminate everything they could find. By early May of 1945, with Germany's surrender, the Luftwaffe had essentially become non-operational. Its aircraft had been abandoned on airfields from Norway to Austria. Some were pristine, others cannibalized for parts or damaged by bombing. Fuel scarcity, fragmented command, and decimated infrastructure had already immobilized many units for weeks. By the time the surrender took effect on May 8, thousands of planes remained where they were, a silent testament to a force that had once commanded the European skies. Throughout northern Germany, key locations such as Flensburg and Lübeck held vast numbers of aircraft, whether intact, damaged, or unfinished. In Prague, hangars were packed with Messerschmitts, Heinkels, and various late-war prototypes. At Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary testing ground, Allied investigators discovered a trove of experimental airframes, wind tunnel models, and technical data which revealed the scope of Germany's jet and rocket propulsion research. The sheer diversity of surviving aircraft astonished many Allied officers. Alongside conventional types like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Focke-Wulf Fw-190, they encountered advanced designs including the Arado AR-234 jet bomber and the Heinkel 162. Furthermore, remnants of projects like the Junkers Ju-287 bomber and various transport and reconnaissance aircraft, including the Junkers Ju-52 and Heinkel H-111, were found dispersed across numerous airfields. A great many units had simply exhausted their fuel in the war's concluding weeks, leaving their machines parked and idle. By the cessation of hostilities, the Luftwaffe's entire administrative structure had disintegrated. Commanders capitulated to whichever Allied forces they met, and ground crews frequently deserted their posts without formal orders. Aircraft maintenance records, fuel depots, and stores of spare parts were either incomplete or had been destroyed. The Allied Control Commission swiftly instituted stringent regulations. All German aircraft were immediately grounded, prohibiting any German pilot from flying without direct Allied authorization. These protocols were intended to preclude unauthorized flights, escape efforts, or the movement of high-ranking officials. A significant debate subsequently arose within the Allied High Command regarding which assets to preserve and which to destroy. Certain officers contended that German aircraft represented a security threat if left intact, while others recognized their immense potential for research. It is clear that from the very first days following the surrender, the destiny of the Luftwaffe's aircraft became a complex matter of intelligence, logistics, and political calculation. Immediately upon Germany's capitulation, the Allies initiated large-scale recovery programs to secure the Luftwaffe's most sophisticated aircraft. The United States acted swiftly. On May 8, 1945, one day after the formal surrender, American intelligence units launched Operation Lusty, an acronym for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Led by Colonel Harold Watson, these specialized teams deployed across Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Their objective was unambiguous: locate advanced airframes, seize crucial technical documents, and transport selected aircraft back to America for evaluation. For instance, at Lechfeld in Germany, American forces captured several intact Messerschmitt Me-262 jets. At Grove Airfield, in Denmark, Arado jet bombers and various late-war prototypes were discovered. The most prized aircraft were either flown out or disassembled for transport to the Wright Field Testing Center in Ohio. The remainder were sent to Freeman Field in Indiana for thorough evaluation, where specialized units meticulously cataloged equipment, engines, and design elements. Pilots of the Watson's Whizzers flight group then test flew the captured jets under controlled conditions. Their findings shaped America's initial understanding of swept-wing designs, jet propulsion, and the principles of high-speed aerodynamics. Concurrently, the British initiated a parallel endeavor known as Operation Surgeon. In contrast to the American focus on acquiring physical aircraft, the British demonstrated an equal interest in securing the very engineers, scientists, and technicians responsible for their creation. Teams from the Royal Aircraft Establishment moved into airfields at Fassberg, Schleswig, Husum, and Rechlin to interview surviving personnel and gather crucial documentation. Chosen experts were subsequently transferred to British facilities for post-war projects. At RAF Farnborough, test pilots operated captured aircraft, notably the Me-262, to analyze its capabilities and vulnerabilities. The British held a particular interest in the He-162, as its lightweight construction provided valuable insights for future trainer and interceptor designs. The Soviet Union acted with similar swiftness. Their specialized trophy brigades secured factories and airfields throughout Saxony, Thuringia, Silesia, and Czechoslovakia. Key production facilities, including the Avia works in Prague and the Bf-109 assembly plants in Moravia, consequently fell under Soviet jurisdiction. Aircraft were transported east by rail, along with associated tooling, equipment, and engineers. At air bases near Moscow and Leningrad, Soviet pilots and designers meticulously studied the Me-262 and R-234, incorporating their discoveries into nascent Soviet jet programs. A rivalry soon developed among the Allied powers, as each nation sought access to the most scarce aircraft, especially prototypes existing in limited quantities. Consequently, disagreements arose regarding which nation had rightful claim to specific aircraft, most notably at locations in central Germany, where American and Soviet forces arrived just days apart. The Allied Control Council attempted to coordinate the collection initiatives, but underlying tensions, foreshadowing early Cold War divisions, were already apparent. German personnel proved to be indispensable in these operations. Former pilots, mechanics, and engineers provided answers to complex technical questions, occasionally under strict supervision, and at other times through temporary employment contracts. Their expertise enabled Allied teams to effectively operate intricate systems like the Jumo 004 jet engine, the BMW 003, and sophisticated navigation technology. The Allies meticulously documented all assets, photographs, blueprints, flight manuals, and test reports, prior to determining which aircraft would be preserved and which would be scrapped. By late 1946, the principal collection phase had concluded. Scores of Luftwaffe aircraft had been transported to the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union for extensive analysis. These intelligence programs profoundly influenced early jet engine development, setting the stage for the subsequent phase, the systematic demolition of all that was left behind. By late 1945, the Allied Control Council issued a directive forbidding Germany from retaining any military aircraft. The most valuable specimens had already been transported overseas. The thousands of aircraft left behind were designated for demolition, transforming airfields across Europe into immense scrapyards from 1945 to 1948. The order was unequivocal. All German aircraft, including fighters and bombers, transport aircraft, trainers, and prototypes, were systematically dismantled, unless specifically designated for research. Airfields like Flensburg, Lübeck, Blankensee, Grove, and Tarnowitz became key disposal centers where Allied crews disassembled and crushed the airframes. This process fed scrap metal into Europe's rebuilding industries. At Grove, entire rows of fighters were taken apart. In northern Germany, British units systematically destroyed bombers that had remained intact. Even advanced late-war jets were broken down, unless earmarked for specific test programs. Certain aircraft were disposed of in burning pits or scuttled from barges off the coast. A number of these submerged wrecks remain on the seabed, sometimes found by modern divers. Civilian aviation was also subjected to strict limitations. For instance, aircraft like the Junkers Ju-52, with its dual military and commercial roles, underwent individual assessment. A few were repurposed for restricted transport duties, yet most were scrapped to adhere to established Allied policy. In Czechoslovakia, captured aircraft were briefly integrated into service with new designations before the majority were retired from service and dismantled. Similarly, France operated various German models for training and evaluation, but ultimately phased them out due to dwindling spare parts and mounting maintenance difficulties. There is ongoing historical debate regarding whether more aircraft should have been preserved. Some researchers contend that numerous historically significant airframes were lost in this era due to a lack of storage capacity in museums and archives. Conversely, other scholars point out that Allied priorities centered on demilitarization over preservation, and that the political imperative was to dismantle Germany's military apparatus, which took precedence over concerns of historical value. The scarcity of surviving Luftwaffe aircraft today stems directly from this period of disposal. Furthermore, economic considerations heavily influenced the destruction process. Widespread metal shortages in Europe made the aluminum and steel from these aircraft highly valuable. The recycling of airframes provided raw materials for industries producing goods, infrastructure, and machinery vital for Europe's recovery. For numerous local workers, the task of scrapping aircraft offered steady employment throughout a difficult transitional era. By 1948, nearly all Luftwaffe aircraft had been eliminated. The airfields that had formerly hosted entire fighter and bomber groups were either cleared or repurposed, with some serving as training areas for Allied occupation forces. Still others returned to agricultural use or were converted into civilian airports. While most aircraft were dismantled, after 1945, a select few began a second chapter under foreign insignia. Beginning in 1946, a number of nations operated German aircraft due to necessity, availability, or technical curiosity. These fleets, however, were typically short-lived, yet they fulfilled a significant role in early post-war aviation. Czechoslovakia emerged as one of the first nations to repurpose German aviation technology. Factories in Prague, Kunovice, and Letnany possessed both finished aircraft and incomplete airframes, which their engineers completed into functional fighters. The most notable outcome of this effort was the Avia S-199. Despite being notoriously difficult to pilot, it equipped the Czechoslovak Air Force until it was replaced by newer Soviet designs. Several were later sold to Israel, becoming that new nation's very first fighter aircraft in 1948. Spain similarly continued the lineage of German fighters through licensing agreements that originated before in the late 1930s, Spanish factories began producing the Hispano Aviación HA-1-112, a variant of the Messerschmitt Bf 100.9 design but with domestically made engines. These aircraft remained in service with the Spanish Air Force until the mid-1950s. Their most notable appearance occurred decades later, portraying German fighters in cinematic productions like Time's The Battle of Britain**. In its early post-war reconstruction, Norway utilized captured Bf 109 and AR 96 trainer aircraft. However, parts scarcities ultimately grounded these planes, though several airframes survived for restoration projects during the 1960s and 1970s. Civil aviation also reaped indirect benefits from surviving German engineering, particularly the Junkers Ju-52, which was transitioned to passenger transport in various countries. In France, the Toucan variant was manufactured at Amiot factories and employed in colonial transport operations. Lufthansa also briefly used Ju-52s in the early 1950s, before transitioning to more contemporary aircraft. By the time West Germany founded the Bundesluftwaffe in 1956, no former Luftwaffe aircraft were considered for active operational service. The new Air Force depended on Allied manufactured designs, like the F-84 Thunderstreak, the Canadair Sabre, and later the Fohn 104 Starfighter. German aviation had decisively entered the jet age, leaving its wartime designs to history. Preservation initiatives for surviving airframes expanded in the latter half of the 20th century. Many of today's museum exhibits originate from crash sites, remote lakes, or long-interred wrecks on the Eastern Front. Restoration specialists often had to amalgamate parts from several aircraft to reconstruct a single display specimen. In the modern day, only a very small quantity of intact Luftwaffe aircraft survives. Examples of the Me-262, Bf-109, FW-190, and Arado AR-234 are housed in museums from Washington to Berlin, while a few privately constructed replicas perform at air shows. Almost all original, wartime airframes are now permanently grounded. What remains is a mere fragment of the colossal force once deployed across Europe. They are silent testaments to how swiftly even advanced machines become obsolete. and how the post-war world redefined the legacy of German aviation. If you found this analysis insightful, we invite you to watch What Happened to German U-Boats After World War II, a thorough look into how the U-boat fleet was captured, meticulously studied, and then dispersed worldwide following the war's conclusion. Please like this video, subscribe, and activate notifications for more historical content.